now we're good. Okay, now I can say, here's the situation. One thing we have found out in the last 24 hours is the same thing that we've always known in the cannabis industry for a long time. Politics can really screw up the world. Now, normally I say that, politics got us into this mess and politics will get us out. That is quite true. However, we have to always bring in the second element of the room, the second elephant in the room, and that, of course, is business. So let's discuss politics, let's discuss business, and let's get into the rotation. Hit it.
Is this it?
Okay.
Thank you, Gary, for that amazing cold open, and appreciate you commenting on the state of world affairs. For folks who are tuning in today, and this may be your first rotation, hopefully this is not our last rotation with the outbreak of World War III. But I am your executive director, Christopher Cano, of the Suncoast chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML. And for those folks tuning in, we do this weekly broadcast each and every week, which actually started over a decade ago in Carlos's garage. Carlos Hermida, our deputy director and sound engineer.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
And the man who always has the most boss political commentary and who runs down the politicians in the hallway and makes them listen to what the people have to say, our political director and director of public policy, Gary Stein.
Yeah, I know the art of the deal.
What's the art of the deal, Gary? What is it?
Kick them in the ass and ask if they want to surrender.
Look, there's a lot going on in geopolitics. There's a lot going on in the cannabis space. And we thought it would be awesome to bring on some guests who can balance the playing field with our various views. We've been accused on this show of being entirely too liberal, despite the fact that Carlos has been a Republican and independent, and now he's gone full-blown progressive. Gary has always been independent-minded. Me, I have been a true blue Democrat since 2008, and the more I've been that, now I am no longer that. I am just like, neither one of these parties know what the frack they're doing, but since you got to pick a gang, I guess I'm rolling with the blue since we're in the two-party system. But I would
say I did grow up as a Democrat, but in college I was in the Young Republicans, just to see how the other side lives. And then I started smoking, and then I realized I got to go back to being a Democrat.
What struck out to me was I just realized you and Gene Simmons are like contemporaries. So like when I think about it, Gary in my mind is just like he's one of those Kiss Jews from Detroit. But the fact that I know him as Danny DeVito in Florida is like it has skewed my view of him. Like Gary is actually much cooler than he appears to be. And so that's what I have to remember, that when I'm talking to Gary, I got to remember that he's a Gene Simmons type of guy and not necessarily Danny DeVito, even though, age does that to you,
Simmons is a little avant-garde for me. I mean, he tends to get kind of rapey.
Well, look, in all the craziness of the world, we wanted to bring some balance to the show and bring a special guest on who can really, get to the issues from a nonpartisan point of view about individual freedom. And as our special guest, Geoffrey Lawrence from Reason Foundation. Geoffrey, welcome to the rotation.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Carlos. Great to be here. It's really an honor.
Well, first and foremost, tell folks, what is the Reason Foundation? Folks really don't understand think tanks, these days. And truth be told, think tanks do a lot of the media programming, the thinking, the talking points, and the research for us in this day and age. Hell, I know politicians don't even read their own bills. If a think tank puts it out, they just read what they tell them to say.
Right. So, yeah, think tank for most people is kind of an abstract thing, but the role we played, Reason Foundation is one of many large think tanks, Brookings Institution, Cato Institute, Center for American Progress, spanning from left to right across the political spectrum. The role of a think tank is to assemble the research that's out there on any relevant policy issues. So, for instance, at Reason Foundation, one of our big policy areas, and we have 9 or 10. But one of them is ending the drug war and legalizing and regulating drugs. So we'll summarize the research for policymakers on this is the effect of consumption. This maybe how large the industry is, how many people it employs, the economic impact. And here's a list of ways that you might think about regulating cannabis, for instance. And here's how 24 states have legalized. Here's kind of the variations between each of those regulatory regimes. And then a lot of think tanks like ours creates draft legislation or model language that a state or federal policymaker can use in order to introduce a bill. And then we'll show up and testify on that bill. So it's kind of a wraparound support mechanism for policymaking is the way a think tank works.
Now that's interesting to me because of the fact that we are dealing with such a bizarre patchwork of laws in this country because of the fact that we basically federalized policies so that every individual state can have their individual laws, and we just basically have tolerance to an extent from DC. So how do you get together a unifying policy for 50 states who have 50 different laws?
There's no way to really unify it. I mean, that's part of the kind of the beauty of the federal system is that states are allowed to experiment on their own and see what works. If every state was doing the same thing, you wouldn't see how one state is failing and another state is succeeding. It's good that we're able to kind of iterate on what prior states have done because if you look at a market look at Florida's medical market for cannabis. It's extremely limited. It's hard to get into. There's not much competitive pressure, and that leads to fewer product choices and high prices for consumers. California has also got extremely high taxes, and it's prevented people, both producers and consumers, from transitioning from the illicit market to the legal market. But if you look at a state like, let's say, Michigan, where they have a pretty, a very dynamic market that's easy to get into and get out of, the tax system is very streamlined. There's only one level of taxation. They've been a lot more successful. And so that allows us to go around to new markets and say, California has done a couple things right. But overall, you might want to look at Michigan as a good model for the next iteration of a state regime. And so that experimentation is something that we like.
I like Michigan. I got to say, I when I was going to the DNC back in August, I stopped off in Michigan because I looked on Weed Maps and I saw what the prices were for bud in Chicago. And I was like, no way. Those are Florida prices. And we all know nobody wants to pay $70 for an eighth of bud, from a dispensary. And I went into Calvin Johnson's spot, Primitive, in Michigan. And I mean, they for $60, you walk out with a bag full of goodies. You can't even walk out of anything in a Florida, medical marijuana treatment center, or even or some of those in Chicago with $60. And so that was just a striking thing to me of how Michigan's doing it right from a consumer point of view. And normal, we're dedicated to protecting consumers from both bad actors in the industry, whether they're putting out overpriced or moldy products, or making sure that consumers don't have to jump through hoops to get access to what they need. And that's part of what we keep running into here in Florida. And I mean, I know, Jeff, you've wrote a lot of papers, and as senior researcher at the Reason Foundation, you talked a lot about how the hemp market. And I know Carlos, being in the hemp business, is really watching closely. Past few sessions, they've tried to put him out of business in Florida. Now they're making him jump through a bunch of hoops. Now they're using the regulatory framework under the Department of Ag, which was favorable under the previous Ag commissioner, and the current one, is cracking down. And so I just wanted to hear kind of your 2 cents. I mean, I even read your article that was published in Marijuana Moment of how, it's time to level the playing field between marijuana and hemp products with a single cannabis retail license type. And I was just curious, if you could give the folks, your elevator pitch, if you will, or your 2 cents of summing up, like, how can someone like Carlos be in the market? Should someone like Carlos be in the market? How do we do that? I know, Carlos, what was the reason you even opened up a hemp store? Just tell the folks listening, Carlos.
So I want to own a cannabis dispensary. And that essentially was like the best way to go about getting, customer contacts and get, essentially, like in an ideal world, I would just be able to just add one more product to my shelf, essentially. You know what I mean?
And to add to Chris's question, if you had a market that was easily regulated so that people could actually get into it, and fairly regulated so that anybody would have access to it, would there be an issue with having a hemp market in the first place?
Yeah, no, I think those are great questions. I mean, part of the reason that this hemp market exists is because, one way to look at this is that this is the way that Congress has said they want to legalize intoxicating cannabinoids, because they've made no laws, despite having several proposals, moving toward federal legalization of cannabis writ large. But they created this provision in the Farm Bill that says, well, if you grow it in the plant, it has less than 0.3% THC, then you can extract it and convert the CBD extract into whatever you want, be it Delta 8 THC or whatever. And those products, not only are they kind of equally intoxicating, but you can ship them across state lines. You can avoid all kinds of crazy excise taxes. You can avoid federal corporate income tax penalties. And so, these products are treated basically like any other product you would see on a store shelf. And because of that, they can be offered a lot more cheaply to consumers, and they're readily available. You can buy them on any corner store, right? And even if you're in a legal cannabis state, there might only be a couple dozen dispensaries across the state, and you might have to drive 50 or 100 miles to get to one, right? And so it's both the price and accessibility of these products that makes them kind of puts them in a favorable position relative to consumers. And so we see this as probably, cannabis should move more toward the direction of hemp rather than the other way around, because cannabis is so heavily taxed and so restrictive in terms of access. Like, if you look at California, there are parts of California where you can be 100 miles from the closest dispensary. Can you really say that cannabis is legal in those places? But you can buy an intoxicating hemp product, and you can even buy them online and have them shipped across state lines. So we think that that's probably the future, but there needs to be some kind of guidelines, because some hemp producers can have dangerous manufacturing standards where they don't remediate all the solvents or pesticides. And so you have dangerous chemicals that are in there. A lot of times they're sold under labels that don't indicate who actually made the product. And so if someone gets sick from these products, they don't know who to sue, who to hold accountable. And that kind of lack of basic regulatory structure inhibits market function, right? Because you need to be able to hold the producers accountable. And so our preferred pathway is that states create a registry of anyone who sells these kind of products, just so we know who's making them, who's shipping them into the state. And then any retailer that wants to sell these products has to demonstrate that they can properly age gate, check for ID, not sell it to minors. But any retailer could apply for what we propose as a unified or a single cannabis retailer license. And that would allow them to sell both state licensed cannabis goods as well as intoxicating hemp goods. and try to treat these two product classes as comparably as possible. Now, the large multi-state operators and other cannabis licensees that have paid a lot of money for retailer license might not like that approach because it really opens up the market. But it's our view that even if companies have paid a lot for retail licenses, they knew this was a high risk business when they got into it, and it's just not sustainable that you're going to have these single-use stores for marijuana for very long. We don't do that in any other industry. So eventually it's going to look more like a common retailer license. Like you can go to the corner store and buy a 40 of beer. Why can't you buy a joint there?
Good point.
That's interesting. I had a very interesting conversation with Comrade Boris Jordan, as I mentioned earlier, in regard to Curaleaf is concerned. And his basic thing was that you have people who are unregulated, and therefore they don't have to pay the cost to get the testing done that the MSOs have to go through. And that was his same argument against home grow. Say, why should the people be able to grow at home and not have to spend the money to get the product tested like I have to in my company, and that kind of situation? How would you respond to that?
Well, hold on, Gary. Before Jeff answers that, I just got to push back real quick, because what we've seen in regards to testing the MSOs is their organization and True Booth have both bribed and bought testing results that they wanted. Like we've even seen labs get investigated for being corrupt because they're taking MSO dollars to give them the results they want to pass it on to the consumer. And then on top of that, they're even expanding into the very same market that they're trying to put out of business, especially Curaleaf. So I'm just shocked to see that. And Jeff, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just when I hear bullshit, I gotta call it out.
No, that's totally true. The testing regimes are questionable. You see licensees that not only shop their results by submitting samples to multiple testers, but if you pull any two buds off of the same identical plant with the same genetics, you're likely to naturally get different results anyway. So what does the testing tell us? Now, consumers, I think, do like the fact that they can see the analytics of what they're buying on the label. But I would say, in this case where you've got licensees complaining about regulatory costs, well, the approach isn't to foist those same regulatory costs on everyone else. We should reduce the costs that they're facing, right? And that might not necessarily be testing, but it could look something like reducing the burden of track and trace systems, all of the manual data input that comes along with metric, for instance. Some states have moved away from one tag per plant to like batch tracking of harvest. So you track a whole room, and it kind of lowers those regulatory costs. I could see doing that in state licensed cannabis, and honestly in hemp, you could track an entire field of product and call that a batch. So I think leveling the playing field between cannabis and hemp should look more like reducing the barriers to cannabis.
Nice. Carlos, what are your thoughts, brother? You're in the business.
Yeah, in the newly re-regulated business. Talk about that.
I'm sorry, guys. I've got this weird situation with this guy in a towel out in front of the store. So I'm a little distracted.
Is he only wearing a towel?
You know what? Here, have a look.
Oh, it's a Confederate flag. That's okay. He must be Republican.
If he tries to come in here, I'm gonna have to run up and stop him. But what happened? Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, so
did he drop the flag?
He did drop the flag, and I think he's like trying to look at the employee in here. But so to answer your question, Keno, I mean there's a couple of things that I kind of want to mention here, and you know what, I gotta stop. Sorry.
All right, well we'll go back to Jeff. That what Carlos handles the obviously, as you can see, the struggles of being a business owner as well. So in the hemp industry, it's kind of wild. So, but Jeff, one thing I wanted to go to while we go back to Carlos and hemp was the Reason Foundation itself, right? As I was stating earlier, folks talk about how we skew a little bit to the left here. Where does the Reason Foundation fall on the political spectrum? Because I was reading some of the research articles, and some of the things I was like, wow, I really agree with it. Other things I was like, yeah, I don't agree with this at all. So so help folks understand where you all fall in the political spectrum. As you said before, there's like the Brookings, and then there's the Cato Institute. So where's Reason fall in all of this?
So we're an expressly libertarian think tank.
Okay.
That means that, what is libertarian? It means we believe in maximum individual rights and generally very small government. Libertarians are generally very skeptical of war and defense spending, and critical of an expansive state, whether that's a police state or a welfare state. But this is part of the reason that we oppose the drug war, for instance, is that it's a huge justification for taking away people's civil liberties and staffing up a major police presence that's capable of surveilling and searching us at a moment's notice to see if based on trying to prevent totally nonviolent activity. Right. So that's where we fall. It's kind of not really affiliated with either party. I think there are currents of libertarianism in both major political parties. Of course, there is also a libertarian party, which is ideologically similar, but we work with people from across the spectrum.
Appreciate that. Carlos, I'm glad you got to come back.
I'm very sorry for the interruption. Very, very sorry, but I swear to God, it's late, but I have a great answer for your question, Christopher. So I listened to everything you guys were saying, and I think there's one thing that's being left out here, and we went over all these reasons why the hemp industry exists, and they were all wonderful reasons, and they're all absolutely true, but there's one more reason why the hemp industry exists, and it's because common people don't want to become criminals to get their medicine. A lot of times people forget that, and it's a great reason why the cannabis industry should move more towards the hemp industry than the hemp industry more towards the cannabis industry. It's because if you go the other way, you're literally making criminals out of people that shop at hemp stores. There's a reason why people come here. It might be because they don't, have the money to go to a normal dispensary. They don't have the money to go to the doctor, or they flat out just don't want to be on a list. So I think it's very important to understand that, regulating the hemp industry more literally makes more criminals. That's really what you're doing.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So that's my whole thing. That's my whole spiel. As much as I think it would be ideal that the cannabis industry becomes more like the hemp industry, and I'm allowed to, go in for a license or something like that. Unfortunately, though, I think that's too idealistic of a situation, because all of the money going into the legislator towards, regulating this industry is coming from corporate cannabis.
Well, Carlos, I'm seeing that. We see that in Florida, but I see that up here in Maryland too, right? I sat through the Maryland General Assembly, the last 3 sessions, and last session in the Senate Finance Committee, as they're talking about cracking down on hemp operators, someone brought it up. I believe it was the founder of the National Cannabis Festival. Look, Cheech and Chong and Snoop are selling their hemp products and gummies over the internet. They're still coming into Maryland. Even if you shut down the guy who runs the bodega on the corner, who's selling, hemp gummies, these are still illegally being sold and delivered to people's houses. How are you going to stop that? What are you doing? You know, it just seems like regardless if it's Republicans in control in Florida or Democrats in control in Maryland, government is screwing the pooch when it comes to regulating hemp the proper way. And it's been said by Jeff, by you, Gary, myself, like people just want to get quality access to affordable cannabis products. And the fact that people come to you just prove they don't really care if it comes from an MSO or if it comes from a small business. They just want to get safe access to easy to use products. And the sad part is that I've been to your shop, Carlos, and I've seen how your employees, especially when you're not there, treat people and educate them. And Gary can tell you he hates walking into an MSO, and when he needs help, all they can tell him is, well, this is the THC percentage and this will get you smashed. And it's like, where's the quality of training in it too, and where's the product knowledge? And you just don't see that from folks. So the consumer experience,
there does
not
seem
great.
to be some sort of lack of, typically when Gary makes this argument, I'm like more on the side of the dispensaries being like, oh, it'd be impossible to do that type of training for somebody that gets paid that amount of money. But I mean, to defend that, like, I mean, looking at the difference between something like going to a Trulieve or going to Chillum, here, we're family. These people are here because they're passionate about being here, and they really feel like they're making a difference by providing these products.
Yeah, but Carlos, your market is different from the medical market. We're supposed to have a medical market. What we have is a quasi medical market, because really the people going into the MSOs as a medical patient are not seen as a medical patient when they walk in the door. They're seen as a sale waiting to be built. And they will go ahead and sell them anything they have on the shelves for any reason they can figure. When if a guy walks in and say, look, I've got this severe back pain right now. I can't stand up straight. I can barely even breathe because of the pain. What do you have for me? And they say, well, this indica will get you in the couch, and this sativa will make you think straight. And say, fine, what about my fucking back? Okay. That is what we're dealing with. I think, I mean, your niche right now with the hemp market is totally different than that. People aren't necessarily walking into you for medical reasons. They may ask you medical questions from time to time. But I think when people have a medical card that they actually had to go ahead and get diagnoses for and get a recommendation for and things of that sort, they expect to have a medical market. Like when you walk into a pharmacy and you ask a pharmacist, what does this drug do? Will it make my things fall off? That kind of thing.
I mean,
we ask the pharmacist critical questions. Can you ask critical questions of the guy behind the counter?
So I mean, here's the thing though, Gary, is that we do get a lot of medical questions, and we get a lot of medical questions from people that are dissatisfied with going to the actual medical marijuana dispensary. And what you're saying is absolutely correct. Like the thing is that it doesn't say, as a matter of fact, I have a disclaimer on my wall, on my window, saying we are not an MMJ, we are not a medical marijuana dispensary, and we do not sell medical marijuana. There is, there is a medical place, and there seems to be this hemp dispensary place. And I mean, that is a big barrier to to train all these people into medicine and whatnot. But I'd like to, I had that incident with the towel guy, and I started talking, and now our guest doesn't get to speak that much. But I'd like to actually propose a question to our guest. Why do you think there seems to be this disconnect in the medical marijuana dispensary? Is it that it's some sort of like alienation from corporate culture, or is it just that this corporation doesn't care? What do you think it is?
And consider the fact that almost every state law started with a medical market, started with California.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because a lot of the investors in the regulated cannabis space always saw medical licenses as just a precursor to an adult use license. And so it's kind of a way to test your product in the field and then, lobby for a broader customer base. And so they do see medical patients as more as customers than as patients. And I think it's worth noting that a lot of people who consume for medical benefit might not want to join a medical registry, and they might want to have a different alternative because if you get your name in a database showing that you're a medical marijuana user, well, you no longer have the right to own or carry a firearm, for instance. If you're a veteran, you might not be able to get VA benefits. You might not be able to get welfare benefits, housing vouchers, and things like that, depending on your socioeconomic status. And so, there are reasons even if you're a patient, you might be looking for an alternative. I think Texas is a great example of, so they have TCUP, the Texas Compassionate Use Program, where there are only 12 places. Well, there are currently 6 places in the state where you can get compassionate use products. And the only product that they're allowed to sell is a low THC cannabis oil, right? You can't buy an edible or flower or a smokable product. And so these aren't generally products people are looking for. They're hard to get. Of course, they just passed a bill that would expand the number of retailers to 12. But Texas is a huge state, right? And so there are only about 60,000 people statewide that are even participating in the TCUP program. And most Texans who need access to cannabinoids, even for medical reasons, are buying hemp-derived cannabinoids. The Texas legislature just passed a bill banning hemp-derived cannabinoids.
Not anymore.
That's right. So what we're going to see, kind of what happens, there's a rumor that Governor Abbott may veto that bill. And we've supplied him, at Reason, with language for that proposes a regulated market for hemp products rather than banning them. So hopefully it goes that direction. I don't know yet. But certainly if there's a ban, then you're going to have a lot of current patients who still may not want to be part of the TCUP program, who no longer have access, at least within the state of Texas. They might have to drive to Oklahoma.
Jeff, I wanted to ask you, switching gears from, hemp, we're on a really good topic when you're talking about Texas. Texas, at a state level, recently preempted decriminalization of several cities adopted. We've advocated for decriminalization in Florida. We got the city of Tampa to do it. We got Orange County, Orlando, and such. There's about 11 municipalities in Florida that have adopted it. We even advocated in Lakeland against Sheriff Grady Judd, and we had a showdown about it before the city council. So understanding, like in the city of Eastern Pennsylvania, they just adopted it. Where does the Reason Foundation fall when it comes to local governments being able to adopt decriminalization versus, state governments having preemption power?
Yeah, we're generally in favor of decriminalization of, not just cannabis, but most drugs. Some cities across America have decriminalized psilocybin, for instance, and we've been supportive of that. There's, certainly, I think local police departments recognize that a lot of their funding and their rationale for existence comes down to controlling these substances, right? So they tend to oppose local decriminalization, and depending on how much influence their union has in the police union or whatever has in the state legislature, it can prompt that kind of backlash. So yeah, we've seen that in Texas. We've seen that especially in some other red states. But decrim is definitely a move in the right direction because drug commerce is generally very nonviolent until it becomes criminal. And when people no longer have access to the court system to settle disputes and their claim to property, for instance, then generally they'll resort to violence in order to enforce their claims. And so it's a result of illegality and not the drugs themselves that ends up in
the key word I just took from your answer right there is influence. And that is an issue because we do have lobbyists who represent as their principals, the MSOs or the liquor industry or the tobacco industry in regards to vapes and things of that sort. And that is what we're dealing with so much with legislation is that who is pushing the influence there? Where's the envelope being pushed towards is that sort of situation. And yet we have what we call chaos theory, which basically means nature finds a way, where that if somebody can't get something legally, they'll find another way to ease their pain. And I would have to say, Greg Abbott, I have no doubt as a paraplegic, and I mean this with all due respect to people with disabilities, that he is dealing with some phantom pain. Tim Morgan, a friend of mine of blessed memory now, was the guy, was the brother of the guy who actually got medical cannabis legalized here in the state of Florida, John Morgan. And he had a severe issue as a paraplegic with phantom pain. And the only thing that worked was a decent Afghani strain. So so how do we tease influence out of the industry to get full realization, which is towards the people and not towards the corporate industry interests?
Well, Gary, you're talking money in politics. That's a bigger fight altogether, right, Jeff?
It is. It is.
Yeah, that's a $10 million question because there's certainly a fair amount of cronyism in this industry. And it comes down to, usually it starts out with the authorizing statute that allows for a market to exist, because in states that have passed legalization by initiative, usually it's the MSOs that got together and wrote and funded the initiative, which says, once this becomes legal, only we will be able to sell these products. And then something similar happens in state legislatures, right? Because these big corporate giants will send their lobbyists into the legislature to try to get amendments inserted into a bill that basically does the same thing and limits access to the market. So you'll say only eight licenses will be available in this state, and 2 of them have to be given to somebody named Bob who lives at this address. Actually, Florida's original medical marijuana statute had a provision almost exactly like that. It said, because it gave extra points to someone who owned a citrus processing plant.
Yeah,
right?
citrus or citrus molasses processing plant. Yes,
that's right. So, I'm not quite making these things up. Those type of provisions exist, and they can be targeted to give a license to a specific person who fulfills that requirement.
And by the way, that provision actually got a Brazilian billionaire who owns who supplies Tropicana for all the citrus that Florida can't supply anymore. He put $1 billion into the industry to try to get himself into it.
Well, did he get a license, Gary?
No.
Well, there you go.
One of those few licenses they're still going to give out one of these years.
Well, Jeff, I want to get into a heady subject while we still got you on the show here, and one of them is the backtracking that we're seeing, right? And a lot of it, like the federal government and state governments interactions have a lot to do with it. But one of the things is, I know this administration has cut and slashed budgets and funding to states, and so a lot of states are supplementing their budget shortfalls by increasing marijuana taxes. We've seen it in Maryland. Minnesota just did it. They try to fight against it in California, and then we're also seeing in red states, the pushback is a push towards decriminalization. So blue states are raising taxes, red states are pushing back and re-increasing police budgets, and consumers are caught in the middle. It's like if you're in a blue state, now you're paying more, and if you're in a red state, now you got to look over your shoulder again. And it's just it's a shit show all around. No party's getting it right. What do we do? Especially as a consumer organization like NORML, like where do you all see a pathway forward with all this?
Yeah, so I think it's totally the wrong approach for any state to increase cannabis taxes, because it usually results in fewer transactions on the legal market, right? Because there are basically 2 classes of goods that are direct competitors with legal marijuana. It's illegal marijuana and then hemp-derived cannabinoids, right? So if you increase the cost of legal marijuana, people just go to those other markets. And that's how we see, 8 years after legalization in California, about 2/3 of the estimated marijuana demand is still fulfilled by illicit suppliers. I think most states need to be cutting marijuana taxes, and that might actually result in increased revenues because they'll capture more of the market within the legal system. And we've actually modeled that out in California and showed that if they, eliminated the cultivation tax, which they did in response to our research, that they would start to capture more of the market. And we also think they should lower the statewide retail excise tax and cap the amount that local governments can charge because local taxes are really the killer in California. They can add
email
up to
me
like-
that. I want to put that in front of Governor Moore in Maryland.
Okay, yeah.
I can tell you that if they go ahead and put a tax on illegal recreational, if ever we have that, I can see that the Seminoles waking up and saying, "Oh, look at New Woo." That's how Nevada did it. If you want to avoid taxes in Nevada, you buy from New Woo. You buy from the indigenous coyotes over there.
I go to the Hard Rock, Gary, to buy cigarettes because my wife, like she's spending $16 a pack in Maryland, but when we're in Florida, it's $80 from the Seminoles to buy the same pack of cigarette, a carton of cigarettes. It's like half the price. So I get it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with. So I lived in Las Vegas for 17 years. Very familiar with New Woo, and when they first opened up, they didn't have to track their products through metric. They were also the only dispensary that was allowed to operate a drive-through, so they were able to kind of exempt themselves from a lot of rules and make their store pretty attractive. And despite being on tribal land, it is in the middle of downtown Las Vegas, so it's very easy to get to.
Drive-through tax-free cannabis sounds amazing. That is a business model that sounds so American. I love it. What the hell? And it's the Native Americans getting it right.
Yeah,
right.
And also, New Woo was the first one to actually have a well, you call it a sampling section or a consumption lounge, but they had that attached to their store long before Nevada or Las Vegas in particular got their act together to actually create regulations to allow a consumption lounge. And yet here, as you mentioned before, there's 20 consumption lounges eligible in Nevada. Have any of them ever opened up and stayed open yet? Or have they all been bogged down by regulations?
So I think most of them have been bogged down by regulations. And there's a division. So 10 of the 20 licenses are reserved for existing dispensaries. And then the other 10 have to be standalone businesses. Well, this is kind of a questionable business, even if you get the license, because you have to go to, if you have a standalone tasting lounge, you have to go to the dispensary and buy prepackaged products at retail prices. And then you can resell them basically to customers as they come in. So in order to do that and make it any money at all, you have to have a markup, right? So you're charging a higher amount than you can get at the dispensary across the street, just so people can smoke and listen to music. So that that's just a challenging business model for people to get into.
Now, you actually worked with the company that was sold to Lowell. So I got to bring up Lowell Farms' attempt at a consumption restaurant over in California, and I think most of these places are not going to be able to exist without a proper model that allows more flow of revenue from various sources, including having a food model. And yet that is constantly being fought against. Alcohol is being fought against to be in the same place, and so by having just a place where you have to buy single doses of cannabis and bring it in with you and sit down. How is anybody not supposed to make enough money to be able to stay open? How to pay the rent in Vegas? Because those rents are high.
That's really my point. Is that this even if you get a license, seems to me to be a failing business model. I've been a corporate CFO, and it doesn't. The numbers don't add up to me. And frankly, I find it strange that we ever thought we should separate food and music from marijuana, right? These things just naturally go together. We should treat people like adults. If you want to go to a store and they allow you to sit down and there's a band playing or whatever, I don't think we should have ever had any kind of alarm for that. That should just come with the dispensary license.
Well,
Jeff,
we can get it together in Florida. That would be nice.
Well, let's talk about it, Gary, real quick. In lieu of doing a news segment today, I want us to really discuss the news rather than reporting it. Typically every week I report the normal news and talk about the latest studies. Like this week, there's a study, if you've signed up to Normal, about how preclinical data suggests CBD mitigates age-related cognitive decline, or how there's a study that shows daily cannabis consumers exhibit fewer changes in simulated driving performance compared to controls. Or there's a survey data that shows Parkinson's disease patients report quality of life improvements following cannabis use. And yet we saw that, was it CNN, National Geographic, even the local Fox News affiliate, all were repeating this bullshit study about how cannabis doubles your increase in cardiovascular heart attacks and all of that. And folks in the comments today have been just going hard on it. That they're really concerned to see that type of yellow journalism, and I just wanted to really discuss that. And on top of that, in Florida, we're also seeing that the legislature, with no public input, in its budget deals, is trying to take away medical cards from people who have drug convictions on their records or who get arrested purchasing illegal drugs. And so this is the pushback before I was talking about, Jeff. And I just wanted to go to you and just for you to kind of close us out on these topics of, like, what the hell? Why is mainstream media repeating these yellow journalism in this day and age? And why are legislators so out of touch with people that they want to take us backwards?
Yeah, well, although to us it might seem like marijuana law reform has gone slowly, in reality, over 12 years, we've had half the states that have created a legal market. So, in the public policy world, that's a pretty rapid change of a major societal norm. And whenever something like that happens, it's natural that you have resistance, right? Because we're going against inertia. And we're seeing that.
Teddy Roosevelt did recommend a playoff system for college football, and we still barely got that. So you're right. Public policy moves very slowly, and weed has gone very fast. Correct.
Right. And that's by design. The founders were concerned that if we move too fast in changing laws, that whenever there's a new fad that came up, it would totally upend our society. So I think it's encouraging that we've moved so quickly. I think that the next half of the states are probably the harder ones because they tend to be, southern states and more conservative states. But at the same time as, state revenues have started to stagnate a little bit over the past year or so, that's usually a pressure in the right direction toward legalizing a new market, because you'll find that state lawmakers are going to be looking for new sources of revenue. And that usually bodes well for legalization.
Well, maybe you can explain what happened in Oklahoma then, because here we have a highly conservative state whose medical program actually went to saturation within a matter of about 3 years after opening up, as far as how many patients they had available to it. And you have one of the most open states in the country, which is actually the most conservative state. Now, they have rolled back a bit. Mm-hmm. But what was the impetus for blood red Oklahoma to bursting onto the scene like that?
Yeah, so, Oklahoma is technically a medical market, but you don't need a doctor's recommendation to get a card. All you have to do is pay a $100 fee. You get a card, and then you can, go out and purchase. Also, on the licensee side, it only costs about $2,500 to get a license, and there's no limit on the number of licenses. So Oklahoma, despite being a relatively small state, has over 2,000 dispensaries. So I think by far the highest number of dispensaries per capita in the country. It is a little bit of an anomaly. There are other red states that are legal. I think of Montana, Arizona, Nevada is kind of purple. So, that does exist. But, Oklahoma is definitely a case study that other states need to be looking at, because it's more dynamic than most adult use markets, even though it's medical.
How is the hemp market in Oklahoma right now? Because they started out with that pretty vibrantly.
Yeah, I haven't followed it that closely, although since the taxes are low and the access is high in the medical marijuana market, I think it would be more difficult there to gain market share with hemp products.
So a vibrant medical, rather, adult use market. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just gonna say, I got a bad battery on my PC, so I'm gonna hop off here. But Jeff, I wanted to thank you for joining us today, and Gary and Carlos are gonna close out with final questions with you. But you know, the biggest thing that my final thought in all of this is that uh, American values are all about individual freedom and protecting the individual consumer, and that's not what we see right now. And so, appreciate that you being in the fight with us with the Reason Foundation. Normal, and regardless of political affiliations or political views, we can all agree that and no one deserves to go to jail, and everyone deserves safe and affordable cannabis. And I think that's the biggest thing that we want to take away from all of this. And if folks make a little bit of money in the industry, great. But as I told the folks at True Leave and on day one when we launched our chapter of Normal, you don't deserve to make a red cent in this industry if you don't watch out for sick people, the patients, because that's where it all started, and that's where we're going to go move forward with. And my biggest fear moving forward is that what happened in Washington State, medical systems get cannibalized for the sake of an adult use market where people are just making money, and sick people get left in the dust for boutique cultivars that actually help them. And we're back again to square one, where it's folk remedies and people on the a legacy market having to make the difference. And I just don't want us to have to go backwards to that. So, but I'm gonna hop off, team. Gary, Carlos, please close out the show strong, and thank you, Jeff, for joining us.
Of course, thanks, Chris.
I guess, Jeff, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is that we tried here in Florida to get legalization through a grassroots effort. Regulate Florida was working for many, many years to come from a non-corporate standpoint to get adult use legalization. They worked for years and years and years to get the number of petitions necessary to get it on the ballot, only to be defeated by that system eventually. They didn't have the money to get the number of petitions signed, and when they didn't have the clout to get the Supreme Court to push through their ballot initiative and actually put it on the ballot. And eventually, they just had to give up trying. And then, of course, comes True Leave and their organization putting tens of millions of dollars into a bill, which basically says the only people who'd be able to sell adult use cannabis will be the ones who currently have medical licenses, which means they're the ones who had in their back pocket a $5 million performance bond to go ahead and get into this. So how do we bring it back to the people? How do we? That's what I've been working at right now in Tallahassee for years. I've put up all these bills for patient protections, for parental rights protections, all these things that have to do with the patient and not with the business. And yet I can't seem to get these things put into committee because there's always somebody whose influence prevents it from being heard in committee. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's a tough question because democracy can be expensive, right? Running an initiative, you have to have a signature gathering campaign, which means you have to put workers in the field, have them go door to door or stand out in a parking lot and explain the initiative, try to gather signatures. There's inevitably going to be a series of legal challenges. And so you have to have a team of lawyers that are going to defend whatever initiative. And this isn't just about cannabis, right? It's any initiative that you might put up. And likewise, even if you try to go through the state legislature, you're going to have to spend money on lobbyists. And there's no guarantee of success in either case. So that's a really big question. There's not an easy answer to. However, the one benefit that you have going forward is that now there is a legal precedent by the state Supreme Court because they upheld the True Leave initiative in Florida, and any subsequent initiative that would amend the Constitution in a similar way, protecting the rights of Floridians to possess cannabis products would have an easier path. Basically, there wouldn't be as many ways of challenging it.
I worked with Scott with the Chamber of Cannabis over in Nevada on trying to get all these regulations going forward. And I think that they have worked diligently to try to create some kind of nexus between what the state legislature will allow and what the state tourism board and the people coming to Nevada would want. And yet I don't think they've quite met that match. I mean, they do have pushback from the legal standpoint where they say they don't want cannabis anywhere near a gambling facility, things of that sort. They don't want alcohol and cannabis in the same place. And again, this whole fight about trying to keep food and cannabis separate again has made it so that the models for cannabis consumption lounges can't go forward. So how do we get them to change their minds so that we can actually have a model that works on that level, both for the cannabis, the consumption lounge owners, and for the people who want to go there? Here we are in Florida. If we want to have a consumption lounge, it's kind of a gray area, but you stand your chance.
Yeah. So
gray area.
I think California might give us that model soon. You know, they just recently passed a bill authorizing consumption lounges on a statewide basis. They've had certain cities have had consumption lounges for
West Hollywood, yeah,
a long time. Yeah, Oakland, West Hollywood, and several of them have been successful. So now that there is a state law expressly saying that you can serve food, you can have live music, and these are at regular dispensaries, right? So could be very soon that almost every dispensary in California offers these things, and that would be a model for the future, and could drive, cannabis tourism. You mentioned Southern Nevada. Southern Nevada is the most tourism-dependent local economy in the country, and yet because the casinos have been concerned that the presence of a marijuana industry would invite further federal scrutiny of the gaming industry, they have been behind pushing regs that keeps marijuana off of the strip, and so I think that probably requires some federal change in order to address the issues in Southern Nevada.
I mean, reef is about as close as you can get to the strip, right?
Right.
and they've been trying to encroach on the set. And I can tell you for a fact, I've been in the various casinos on the strip, and there is plenty of dank to be seen. They do somehow get it in there. Usually with people pocketing vapes and things of that sort, but it's so easy to get and so easy to bring in there. So it just begs the question: at what point can you regulate the unregulatable when it comes to the public is concerned?
Yeah, and because Southern Nevada is so tourism dependent, the enforcement on the strip is very lenient, right? So you're not allowed. Public consumption is subject to a $500 civil fine in Nevada, but you don't see law enforcement handing out fines on the strip because they don't want to deter that tourism. Now, I think it's another level when you're talking about actually retailing or having a lounge in a casino property. I think we're a long way from seeing something like that.
Now, they almost passed a bill this year, and they did pass it last year, but they got vetoed by the governor, that would shut down the entire hemp industry. Now, what is California doing right now, and are they going to become a model for other states to follow in regards to that hemp industry?
Yeah, so California, by executive order last year from Governor Newsom, required all intoxicating hemp products to be sold only through licensed dispensaries. And in my view, that's a very protectionist measure designed to preserve the market share of those licensees. I hope that doesn't become a model for other states. I think Minnesota, for instance, is an interesting regime where you have they allow the sale of hemp-derived cannabinoid products through bars and other retail establishments. Although there's still some barrier to getting the license to sell these products, it's still a lot easier than a place like California.
Now, I get the fact that they think that the hemp industry has products that are not guaranteed safe. Mm-hmm. They might be GRAS as far as the FDA is concerned, but generally regarded as safe. And yet there's a disconnect between the manufacturer and the consumer in the fact that they go through these various shops. We have, like, I could say 10 smoke shops on every block practically here in Florida right now that is selling hemp products. Luckily, Carlos has the Starship hemp dispensary in Ybor City, and people flock to him because they know that he is concerned about quality and that he does vet all of his people. And yet we have folks still selling it at the gas station a mile away. So now they've enacted more stringent surveillance. What would you say, it, Carlos, of the hemp industry here in Florida? With
Yeah,
the,
they've
893?
enacted statutes. So for people watching or listening, a new law has not passed, right? This is actually off of a law that was passed 3 years ago that they've claimed to have been enacting already. But they put these statutes forward. They're like asking for a certain type of childproof packaging. They're also asking for some like ridiculous like they banned turmeric from edibles, saying that it's or in carrot juice, saying that it would put a coloring in the gummy that would be attractive to children. That I believe they've banned like certain colors like pink and blue that from the actual packaging. There's a number of things. They're requiring a certain moisture content for flour, which is really, really dry. They're requiring it's a whole bunch of different things. And quite honestly, the problem in Florida with regulating the hemp industry has always been that the department put in charge of regulating it is severely underfunded. There's like, I don't know the actual numbers, but to pull, there's like a real small amount of inspectors that for the tens of thousands of businesses in Florida, and not to mention law enforcement is not educated enough to know that to ask for a hemp permit if they see these products in the store. So unfortunately, a lot of people that are going to get away with selling hemp are people that don't want to be regulated, that don't have a license, haven't paid for the license, haven't put up forth for the regulations. But I mean, there's an obvious hit, and it went from they don't have enough people to regulate us to now they have 3-4 inspectors coming into a distributor with a folding chair, 3 folding chairs and a table and laptops, and they're at the point now where they're educated enough where like 95% of these products have to go. So
all of a sudden, right?
Yeah, like all of a sudden. I mean, they sent, I think it was like 2 or 3 emails saying that these are going to be regulations that they put forward. I don't think they put how strict they're going to these regulations are actually going to be. I don't think they've made sure that they've sent out letters, or what I mean. They haven't really done like a great job of informing people. But compared to other initiatives that they've done in the past, at least they sent an email.
I try to gauge the legislation that I create to work with the legislation and their concerns and fears. Like, for instance, when we put together a home grow bill, we said, wouldn't it be great to have home grow co-ops where people could go in there, grow their own stuff under expert tutelage, where they can actually inventory the input and the output to the state, so there won't be any problem with that. And because they have expert tutelage, they know they're doing it without any additives as far as insecticides and pesticides and things of that sort, so they can actually grow medical grade cannabis for themselves and boutique cultivars that would be specific for their particular concerns as far as medically is concerned. What we got back from the state was that no, we'll allow two plants per house, regardless of how many people in the house are patients. And you have to have a inspector from the Department of Agriculture come over and inspect your house to make certain that the way you're growing it is proper, and that no one can see you grow, even with binoculars, from any particular orifice of your house. And yet they don't have the inspectors to be able to do that in the first place. I don't know if that was a poison pill, but it's an interesting way of putting together legislation, don't you think?
Yeah, I think if you make compliance too onerous or intrusive, then people just stop trying, right? And they go back to being completely illicit. So I think from a regulatory standpoint, it's important to have as light a touch as possible while achieving whatever public safety aim you're aiming to achieve. And yeah, certainly going into people's houses to inspect their home grow is I would call that a bridge too far.
And they also put additional things in, during the budget talks this last year, which ran 2 months after session ended. They actually put in a codicil saying that if you had even gave a nolo contendere to a possession charge of less than 10 grams years ago, that they would take away your medical card. And what does that do? It forces the medical patients into the legacy market. Because
yeah, they probably got arrested because they needed access for medical reasons, right? So we're penalizing them for the condition that we now recognize as legitimate, which is bizarre.
Well, we appreciate you coming on today and giving us more insight as to what the think tanks are thinking about in regards to this is concerned, because we're all still quite confused. So are the legislatures, especially when they get a new batch every 2 years. And we're hoping we can get legislation and possibly even a unified theory in regards to the way things should be run, kind of like the way the international has done a simplified concept for all the countries out there to try to work together to get some kind of unifying policy with all the lessons learned from all the various states that have created their laws in, as we call it, the meth labs of democracy, which are our states. And let me ask you, how can people get a hold of you if they have any questions in regards to the things you've written or get a chance to take a look at your articles, things of that sort?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah. So our website is reason.org. It's for the Reason Foundation. We also have a magazine, Reason Magazine, which is a different website, reason.com. So reason.org, reason.com. And I am research director. You can find my you can find me right at the top of the webpage.
All right, great. Carlos, you have any other questions for Jeff before we head out to that great ether known as Sunday afternoon?
Nope. It's been a pleasure. Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for having me on.
And guys, we will see you next week with some more great, fantastic rotation and some more great, fantastic guests. We have people to discuss what actually happened in session this next year and the people who will be possibly running for office, for governor and everything else that will make the difference here in the state of Florida. So stay tuned and buckle your seatbelts. It's still a bumpy ride. Peace out, guys.
Hey, before we go though, Gary, how can they support us?
Oh, good question. Why don't you answer that one while I drink my coffee con leche?
Well, we have this website. It's called suncoastnormal.org. Now, it's normal is short for National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. So it's spelled NORML. But suncoastnormal.org/membership, you can become a member. Membership gets you a bunch of different perks. You get a cool gold leaf lapel pin. You get access to Suncoast Normal events. We hold rolling contests every year. We hold costume contests for Halloween. We hold a bunch of different events. I actually met Gary. I met with our events director yesterday, and we have some ideas for a cannabis bingo event. And we also have an idea for a cannabis ceremony where we can get a bunch of medical marijuana patients together and treat cannabis like a sacrament. So that should be pretty cool, right?
Is that could be like an ashwagandha ceremony as well, or not?
Something like that, where like we're going to all take ayahuasca, and then we're going to smoke. No, I'm just kidding. No, but the idea is to get a bunch of cannabis patients together and to consume in the herb in a respectful manner. And there's a whole ceremony behind it and everything like that. And I think it'd be very interesting to do with our members.
I think that's the way think tanks work.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Is that what happens? You guys just smoke weed and
No,
I'm more interested in the ayahuasca, but
yeah, but sativa helps.
That's right.
If you believe in that sativa indica thing.
So go to suncoastnormal.org/membership and join. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got ourselves a new Instagram with Suncoast_normal. And of course, you can always just wait. I think I said everything.
All right, so we do have an Instagram again, right? So I can go ahead and release the hostage.
Yeah, you can
good.
share our videos on Instagram now. And I think that's it. I think we're good, and I love you all. Bye.